The reality is, when we look across the chemical industry, we operate in global chemical markets, global chemical and energy markets.
When it comes down to the selling process, it's more than just the words. There's a deeper level of connection that you're trying to reach, that level of understanding, the pain points.
Yeah.
It has to be a win-win. And it's easier to get to that win-win in the local language with that level of trust. Natural gas is the clean fuel. It is the bridging strategy. Everyone can say it's going to be wonderful, and in 5-10 years, we're going to move massively away from hydrocarbons. But the reality is some of those technologies may not be ready.
Yeah.
And natural gas is a cleaner fuel, a cleaner option than coal.
Control the things you can control, and currency is not one of them.
A key component of the modern world economy, the chemical industry delivers products and innovations to enhance everyday life. It is also an industry in transformation, where chemical executives and workers are delivering growth and industry-changing advancements while responding to pressures from investors, regulators, and public opinion. Discover how leading companies are approaching these challenges here on The Chemical Show. Here's your host, Victoria Meyer.
Hi, this is Victoria Meyer. Welcome back to The Chemical Show, where chemicals means business. Today, I am speaking with Patty Summers, who is the Global Business Director at Zeochem. Patty's been on the show before. We will link to her prior episode. Today, our theme is around managing globally and how chemical companies, and many of whom have very diverse operations, have to manage globally. Patty, welcome back to The Chemical Show.
Thank you, Victoria. It's a pleasure to be back.
Well, thanks for being here. So let's just start with a brief introduction to you and to Zeochem. Tell us who you are and tell us about Zeochem.
Yes. So Zeochem is a very old Swiss-based company. And one of our product lines is molecular sieves, which we manufacture across the globe in Europe, China, and here in the U.S. And so we're a company that sells into a lot of diverse markets. My role is chemicals and energy. So I spend a lot of time in the natural gas treating markets, a little bit of petrochemicals, refining. It's those kind of applications that are project-based that use molecular sieves to do purification steps for the materials that go downstream. So I've been at Zeochem about 7 years now, this month. But I've been in the molecular sieve industry for decades, going back to initially starting at Union Carbide, that became part of UOP, and now it's wholly owned by Honeywell.
Yeah.
So I had over 20 years with them. I took a short break from molecular sieves and joined Endress & Hauser, where I did a little bit of analyzers, managing that group and finding applications around the globe for their products, which typically were downstream of molecular sieves. So there was a great fit there in terms of the marketplace. However, got back to my roots in molecular sieves by joining Zeochem about 7 years ago.
Awesome. I love it. Well, so we started talking about this, and I thought it was just such a great and timely conversation for us to have, right? So the reality is, when we look across the chemical industry, we operate in global chemical markets, global chemical and energy markets, right? Because your company branches into some broader territory. And yet within the global market, there are also significant regional differences. And many companies, smaller companies such as Zeochem, and really 80% of the chemical industry I categorize in the small to mid-size, there's a lot of partnership and diversity that takes place when they look at managing global businesses and global supply chains. So, what we're seeing today, of course, as people know, in the broadest sense, we're seeing significant oversupply across many products and markets, with some moderation of demand, yet continued new build in developing regions in China. For the most part, the view is that U.S. markets are fairly strong, although we've seen some weakness maybe in the second half of 24, but generally seen as a robust and resilient market. On the other hand, Europe sees continued challenges, right, on a cost basis, an energy basis perspective, and then some weakening of demand. And then, Middle East, influenced by Europe and also by Asia. And then Asia, of course, is dominated by China. Heavy growth, and the future growth I know coming from India, which is where you've recently been. So seeing significant effects of tariffs, particularly in China, and that affect supply chain issues and more. So bottom line is, this and I know this, the role of a global chemical executive is always interesting and ever challenging. So I know that you just recently returned from a trip to India, Dubai, and so thought it was really timely to get some of those recent perspectives, particularly about doing business. And how they are seeing the global marketplace, but also how you, as a U.S. based global executive, work with partners in India, in the Middle East, and elsewhere.
Yes. Well, that's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. It is a mouthful.
Let's start by saying, having partnerships is absolutely key. And it goes everywhere around the globe. But you're right. Who we choose and how we choose to interact will change by the region. And our products are used with other technologies that we don't necessarily have in our portfolio.
Right.
So first and foremost, it's important to partner with people who have complementary products so that their sales activities and their interactions with the customers are not solely dependent on when these customers may need molecular sieves or not, because our sieves have a long life.
Right.
So they're loaded into these large vessels, they're used and they're regenerated, and their life can be anywhere from 4 years to over 10 years, depending on how it's used, what applications, and how frequently it's regenerated. So we need customers, or we actually need distributors that will be interacting with our customers in between all that. So they know when the customers need help, when they need molecular sieves. So that helps us a lot in terms of increasing our spread.
Yeah, and that's true, I think, for you guys across the globe, leaning into distributor relationships as a way of expanding your reach and expanding your touch points.
Yes. Now, you talk about the different regions. In some places, we want agents, and they'll help line up the sale, and we give them a percentage, commission-based. But in other areas like the Middle East, in-country value is becoming more and more prevalent as a key part of the decision process of those purchasing agents. Right. And what that means is that they're giving preferential treatment to those companies that have invested in that country, in Saudi Arabia or in Qatar, so that they have stock, they have employees, they might even have blending facilities, repackaging or testing, or even some other light manufacturing. So that has become a key element. And that has a lot to do with who you choose to partner with what kind of strength they'd have in that value as the scoring during those purchasing processes.
Yeah.
And we've seen that increase over time.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, so let me just do a little decoder ring action here. So how do you differentiate between an agent and a distributor for those that maybe aren't as familiar with that?
A distributor will actually purchase the material and take possession.
Okay. Whereas the agent acts as a sales agent on your behalf.
Exactly. So if we have an agent, we are directly, our order is with the end user, and they are paying us, and we pay for the service, the sales help, and the assistance that we had from our agent. So you're paying them for a service rather than a distributor will be buying the material.
So, I mean, so you maybe touched on this then, so when you think about this, how do cultural and business practices, particularly in India, and as we look at the Middle East, impact your approach? How does it change your approach to customer engagement and to partnerships?
Yeah, so it varies quite a bit. I know in India, we, for the most part, are focused in on the ethanol market. So this is the dehydration step that allows the ethanol to be blended with the gasoline pool for transportation. So it's an important sustainability step for the Indian folks, and the government, Modi, has taken the lead and said he has this goal of having a 20% blend rate into their gasoline pool.
Wow.
So it's quite an achievement.
Big.
I think it's 20% by 2025 even, so by the end of next year. But they're only currently at 11 or 12%. So they still have some growth to go in terms of building new plants and getting the production settled in the marketplace to supply all this increasing demand. And as such, the structure is that the government will determine how many plants are to be built. They will then tell the banks that they need to fund a certain number of plants. And then the engineering firms will be getting distributions from those banks according to a schedule. So when it comes to doing those initial fills of our molecular sieves into those plants, is highly dependent on the cash flow that comes from the government. So we have open orders. They slip in terms of when they're going to ship, because in India, getting payment is more challenging than other parts of the world. So not a lot of credit that's offered in those markets. And we rely on prepayment. And again, the flow goes back to the government and the banks, and it's all about the money flow. So that's a different element that we don't really take into account fully in other regions necessarily. Not that we don't have prepay accounts around the globe, but I mean, everybody does. Everyone's in different financial situations. But for the ethanol market in India, where we participate there, it dictates a lot of the timing.
Because it's so project
orders.
dependent and tied to the government objectives and government fundings and priorities.
Yeah. And because at the end of the day, the plants are owned and operated by farmers, by cooperatives. It's still very much, back to the early days when we had a lot of plants here in the U.S. It started with the farmers having the feedstock. So we've grown up and become a little more corporate here in the U.S., but in India, it's still very much the local cooperatives.
So that makes me think that it's really important to have local presence and people that really locally know the businesses. So if I think about the oil and gas market, for instance, in North America, which is the areas that I'm familiar with, when people go out to West Texas and they're selling oil field chemicals, a lot of times it's people that grew up in those communities. They have very tight relationships. They live in those communities. Do you see the same thing happening as you do business in India?
Yeah, very much so. And even more so because India is a collection of a lot of states, and each state will have their own local language as well. Yeah. So even communicating across the country presents a bit of a challenge.
Yeah,
and only people in cities can fluently speak English. You can find English in some of the other larger cities, but really getting down to the purchasing decision, you do need to rely on locals to navigate that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think we sometimes number one, so there's so many Indian companies that we work closely with across, the U.S., across the globe, and on a regular basis encounter Indian people that are very fluent in English, and yet it's interesting the whole the variety of languages and the skills that are needed to really do business effectively in the country.
And I think, not to cut you off, but that's doing business effectively, I think, is the key. Because a lot of these people will speak English and we can communicate. But as you know, when it comes down to the selling process, it's more than just the words. There's a deeper level of connection that you're trying to reach, that level of understanding, the pain points. Yeah. And, you've talked about it before, about getting to know your customers and bridging. It has to be a win-win. And it's easier to get to that win-win in the local language with that level of trust. So, yes, a local presence is absolutely key. You see that in the Middle East as well, for slightly different reasons. Because the Middle East has very distinct protocol and procedures that you need to go through for these massive RFQs. And understanding how to navigate the particulars of those individual RFQs issued by large corporations where they have a lot of people checking all the boxes. And you can be kicked out if you don't tick all the right boxes. So it's important to have somebody who understands the culture, understands each customer, knows how to ask the questions for clarification ahead of time before you might be on the outside looking in.
Yeah, interesting. So you talked a little bit about the fact that this is really much of your business there is in India in particular is project-based, timetable slip. You don't always have control of that. How do you manage that? That is definitely a variability in supply chain and in your sales and your delivery process that, the reality is from an operations perspective, steady state is always the best. Predictability is preferred. And yet, it sounds like you don't necessarily have a lot of predictability at times. How do you guys manage that?
I'm smiling because I get picked on because of that, because I can't forecast. And I said, that's right, I can't forecast. What I try to do on a global basis is streamline the product line. So we have a handful of major movers in terms of the product size, and how it's packaged. so that we can deal with those flexibilities. We still have product moving. It may not be to customer A, but we've got it in stock. It's going to go to customer B because they paid first. So it's very fluid, but by streamlining and having only a few products for the major markets, we do have the specialties, but it's a smaller part of my business. But by having the large volume movers, I can oversee, across multiple customers and balance it out. So it all comes together. Not perfectly, mind you, but it's not as much chaos as it might seem otherwise.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think there's this whole element of standardization that's needed to be effective. And it's kind of the whole 80-20 rule. I would imagine, the Pareto principle applies for so many factors for a reason, because, if you can get yourself to 80%, whatever your target number is of standardization, it gives you that ability to navigate.
It does, and it helps us manage our inventory, and it helps me have more inventory available on demand, which in the U.S. market, I think has really given us a distinct advantage, that we maintain good levels of stock and can respond rapidly to our customers' needs, because there are those unplanned upsets. And we are the go-to. I'd like to think we are the go-to because we can supply on short notice for those customers that have an upset.
Yeah, makes sense. That's great. Let's talk a little bit about sustainability, right? So we know that sustainability is becoming increasingly critical across all businesses, all geographies. Well, I say all geographies. Is that true? As you venture into India and the Middle East, where does sustainability, carbon reduction, and other things factor into their priorities?
India, it is a tough one because I'm not involved down at the individual plant level per se, but we can say that their use of ethanol and wanting to blend that into the gas pool, it is having a positive impact on the environment. So that's India. If you look at the other markets that I sell into, natural gas, let's just say at a high level, natural gas is the clean fuel. It is the bridging strategy. Everyone can say it's going to be wonderful, and in 5-10 years, we're going to move massively away from hydrocarbons. But the reality is some of those technologies may not be ready. And natural gas is a cleaner fuel, a cleaner option than coal. So we are seeing strong markets for natural gas processing, even the LNG plants, especially here in the U.S. that we've seen grow. They've been strong in other parts of the world for quite some time. But anyway, there's investment in natural gas and LNG for those reasons. Now, when it comes to using our products in the processing of natural gas, it's mature technology. But what we're seeing is that our customers are very receptive to our services of helping them optimize. So use less energy in the processing of natural gas, getting more life out of the molecular sieve loads that we do put in so that they have less environmental impact on disposal, and even just the whole reload process of the trucking of the vans to get it there, trucking the spent material to be disposed of. So it's got its own little circle there, circle of life, and trying to get longer life, minimize those disruptions and disposal costs, use less energy as you're operating those plants day to day. We've formed some tight partnerships that have really helped us differentiate ourselves from our competitors to be able to impact that.
That's great. And I think your point about, natural gas being the clean fuel of choice, or at least a bridging strategy, I think that is one of these reflections that, depending on who you're talking to, but I think more people are coming to that realization of the future world where we're looking into green energy sources, whether it be solar, wind, and other things. It's a ways away, right? We're not ready yet to have it fully impacted. And so when you think about moving from coal to natural gas is a cleaner alternative. Heavy hydrocarbons to the light hydrocarbons, it's a cleaner alternative. So it's all kind of this stepwise sustainability progress that we're seeing take place.
And it's nice because it's established technologies. Yeah. We know how to do it. We know how to do it responsibly. And I think it'll be around for longer than people want. I mean, I hope we get there sooner. with some of these greener technologies.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I think there's going to be another decade or two.
At least I've seen somebody said, another 70 years. We'll see.
Oh, gosh.
I don't know how to, but I think it all depends on what you're looking at and what you're measuring. So we'll see. Time will tell.
Right.
So, let's turn and talk a little bit about leadership and strategy. So as a leader in a mid-size international company, how do you balance local autonomy and global strategy? And I think about this, you have employees, but you also have tight business partner relationships who are obviously external to you, but who also need to align to your business objectives, to your business strategy as you serve markets.
It takes a lot of coordination, I will say that. And thank goodness we all got used to Zoom and Teams and these other remote ways of communicating, because it's not as good as being there, but it's better than a phone call. And so we can stay connected in ways that we couldn't before. But in addition to that, having the right channel in country chosen for that country, for whatever they bring to the party, depending on what part of the world we're in. As I manage, I'm in touch with my team so that they know throughout the month how we're progressing, what I'm looking for. And it is a coordination because as we try to branch out into new regions, references are really important. And so we just got a great reference in the Middle East that's going to help us in China, for example, just to show that, yes, we have good products. Others have trusted our materials for decades, and now you can too. It's okay. So trying to coordinate and make all that come together is fine. Now, me personally, I do a little bit of block flow. I will focus in on certain regions for a couple of weeks, if not 4 weeks, and make sure everything's aligned, move on to the next. Not that I'm not touching base in between, but I do tend to focus and dive in deep in one region and then move to the next and move to the next. Just kind of works for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think there's the whole studies of you can't multitask very effectively. None of us really can. And so I think this idea of block focus in different markets and different regions makes sense. It's the focus in a bigger way. Yeah.
And I try not to focus too much on currency exchange. That's just me. We report our earnings in Swiss francs, so that doesn't always work in my favor depending where in the world. But if I found that if I focus on the customers, focus on the value, and even a couple pennies count, just being very mindful of those margins points me in the right direction. Has been a good.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, control the things you can control, and currency is not one of them.
No, and you in my business, and I think in any business, you can't keep changing your strategy.
Right.
You have to have a strategy, and it's multi-year, and you might tweak and change a little bit along the way, but you can't be managing and reacting to swings in currency too frequently.
So we're approaching the end of 24. We're at, we've recently gone through a presidential election in the U.S. We're at the cusp of a new administration. Lots of conversations around what that potentially means for global trade, particularly when we think about tariffs. Right. Did that come up at all? How are you or your business partners thinking about that as you look forward over the next 12 to 24 months? Is it too soon to tell, or do they have ideas?
Well, it's a little soon. But if you take some of the pre-election information and talk and chatter into account, we will see increased tariffs on imports coming into the U.S. While that gives me a little bit less flexibility in terms of sourcing from the multiple plants, because there's times where I do want to source from China and bring to the U.S., depending on the product, depending on the strength of the individual markets and the demand on our plant. What I'm really looking at now is how is that going to change the competitive landscape? And I think it will. And I think that's what Trump's all about, is that in his mind, there maybe is too much presence from the low-cost Chinese material. With the increased tariffs, I think it's going to be impactful for some of our competitors. Currently, the molecular sieves coming in from China are tariffed at 25%. So if it goes to 60%, that's a big step.
That's huge.
And I think it's a game changer for some of my competitors. Now, with my big plant in Louisville, Kentucky, I think it may open up some of the market to us that wasn't available before.
Yeah.
So, a little bit, it's a little bit of having more market available to me, but how do I do the sourcing? How do I change my sourcing a little in that direction of sourcing the rest of the world from the China plant best I can? We're sourcing Brazil, India, Middle East from China. And so we've already started down that path. But I will tell you that in the past, the 25% tariff wasn't really enough to change the market dynamic. And we were not able, there's market prices, we weren't able to just pass on that 25% because all of a sudden there's 25%. So, but I think 60 is it's a higher level. I think that's going to be a game changer. So it's only now that, and we did a little bit ahead of time, but now we're doing our math and trying to see what does it really mean more to our competitors. And I'm glad we have a plant in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point, though, in terms of as we gear up for a new administration, potentially new trade policies, it's a great time to reflect on strategy and what it means for global balances, business strategies, market strategies, sourcing strategies. I think a lot of work going on behind the scenes, not just at Zeochem, but everywhere.
Oh, yes, including raw materials and parts and pieces. I was reading something on the news just yesterday about can we even get the parts we need for raw materials. We've gotten used to a world of available things that we can use and have access to. And now that might not be available.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Well, Patty, thank you for joining us today on the Chemical Show. Really appreciate having you here.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. Keep following, keep sharing, and we will talk with you again soon.